So have you ever wondered how to make your Java applications more interactive? Well, in this video, I'll break down everything you need to know about using the JButton class in the Java Swing framework. If you've been struggling to create functional and engaging buttons in your GUI, this tutorial is your game changer. Stick around to learn secret tricks that will make your buttons stand out. Without further ado, let's begin. Also, if you're interested in improving your skills and knowledge in software engineering concepts while building projects, check out today's sponsor, CodeCrafters. With CodeCrafters, you can learn by deconstructing popular developer tools and recreating them from scratch. For example, if you're looking to master Java, you can try to build your own Redis course. Not only do you hone your Java skills, but you can also strengthen your networking and systems programming knowledge. And when you are done, you can add these projects to your resume to stand out more. You can get started today by using my affiliate link in the description. They are offering a free tier and 40% off discount on any of their paid membership plans. Thanks to CodeCrafters for supporting the channel. So before we begin, make sure to import these libraries into your project. Alright, so first we're going to need a JFrame window. So you can think of JFrame as a canvas where we can draw the different components onto it, such as the label and the button that we're going to do in this tutorial. So I'm just going to briefly explain what these lines of codes do. And if you want a more detailed explanation, feel free to check out my JFrame video that's on my channel. And I'll link it in the description if you're interested. But basically, we're instantiating our JFrame object, and then we're giving it a size of 500 pixels of width and then 400 pixels height. And then we're setting the location relative to null so that we can load our app at the center of our screen. And then lastly, we're defining the close operation to exit on close, which means that when we terminate the application or the GUI, we also want the process that handles this program to terminate as well. So now that we have our JFrame window, let's create our JButton component. So there are 4 ways to instantiate a JButton. First, we can pass in an action. This initializes the button so that when the button gets clicked, an action will occur. And I won't go over too much in this video, but you can think of action as a beefed up version of the action listener interface, because you can do more with it than just handling action events, such as defining the properties of the action like the name, description, and it also supports enabling, disabling the actions and other configurations. And the main reason why you'd want to use an action over an action listener interface is when you plan on using the same action with multiple components. But for this video, we're going to just make it simple and we're just going to implement the action listener interface, which I'll go over later. And the next way we can instantiate a JButton is by passing a string and an image icon. Here, we instantiate JButton like this if we want to provide a text and an image at the same time. And then the next one, which is what we're doing here, is we're passing in a string, which will just add text to our button. And next, we could just pass in the image itself. And then lastly, we could just instantiate a button with nothing on it. Now to add our JButton to our window, we can just call on the add method from our JFrame class. And before we run the program, we still need to set the visibility of the window to be true. And everything should be good, so let's launch the app right now. And yeah, so we can see our JFrame window here, and then also the button component that we added onto it. But as it is right now, if we click on the button, nothing's happening. Which brings me to the next part of adding an action listener to our button. So let's close this for now. So to add an action listener to the button, we call on the add action listener method, and then we pass in an action listener interface where we have to define the action performed method. And in this method, we can define what the button is capable of. In this case, what we want this button to do is just output a string Java is cool to the terminal when the button's clicked. So let's launch the app again. Everything looks good. So now let's hit the button. And yeah, so in the terminal, you can see that it says Java is cool, which is the action that we wanted to perform when the button was clicked. So now I'm going to show you a different way of doing this by making a separate class for our JFrame and then implementing the action listener interface with that class. So first what we're going to do is create a new class. So we're going to go to our source folder and we're just going to create new Java class, and then I'll just call this JButton app. Alright, before we begin, we're going to be importing these libraries into this project or into this file. Alright, so next we're going to make this class extends to the JFrame class. Then we're going to create the constructor for it. It's going to be JButton app. So here we're going to be basically translating the code that we made in our main method and then putting it into this class such that when we instantiate this object, it'll basically create the same app that we had earlier. So first we're going to paste these lines of code. So it's the same thing, but this time we don't need the window reference to call on the different methods. We can just call them directly because this object is a JFrame type. So then we're just going to add in our JButton component onto our window. So now to call on our class, we go back to our main method and we can delete everything here. And then to create our class, we're just going to say JButton app, which is the name of our class. And we're just going to say app equals new JButton app. And then what I like to do, because remember how we have the set visible method at the end, and it's good to have it there because it makes sure that everything is loaded before we display, or everything is loaded before we display the GUI or the window to our screen. Just call the set visible method and set it to true. Let's run the program. And yeah, so everything looks the same, except we don't have any actions yet for our button. And let's close this for now. Alternatively, we don't need a reference. We can just remove this and kind of chain in our methods like this. And it still worked the same way. Yeah. All right. So let's just close this for now. Let's head back to our JButton app class. So now let's add an action listener to our button. So instead of directly creating a new action listener within our add action listener method like we did before, we will instead be implementing the action listener interface with our JButton app class and then have our button listen to this class's action listener. And we're going to get an error here because we need to implement the action performed method. So if we hit enter, now we don't get the error and we have this new method here. So for the button, we're still going to call on the add action listener, but this time instead of adding a new action listener interface where we define the action performed method within this button, we just pass in this reference, and this refers to the instance of our object. In this case, this is considered one instance. And if we create a new JButton app, it'd be a separate instance. But I'm not going to go too much into it. Just know that it refers to just that single instance that we're working on. And you might be wondering why we do it like this. Like, why couldn't we do it just like before? Well, what happens if we have multiple buttons? So for example, it'll look something like this. That's going to start looking really, really messy, which is why we have this action, which is why we implement the action listener interface with the class so that we can organize all of the logic within one single action performed method. So now you might be thinking, if each button is going to share one single action performed method, how do we know which button is pressed? Well, I'm going to show you two ways how we can do that. So the action performed method takes in an action event parameter. And action event has two useful methods for us, get source and get action command. I'll first demonstrate get source. So when we call in get source, it returns us the component whose action got triggered. Here we'll be checking to see if the component that got triggered is the same button that we created. And to do that, we need to make our current button a global variable so that we have access to it in the action perform method. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to do that real quick. Private JButton button, and just remove this. So let's launch this program again. And then if we click on the button now, it should work. So yeah, it says I pressed the button at the bottom left and it says get source, which is the method we use to listen or to know which button's action was activated. Another way is to get its action command. So what the action command is, it's a string that describes the action of our button. And by default, the text that we first initialized the button with is going to be the action command. So let's run the program again. Then when we click, it outputs two lines, one with the get source method and the other one with the get action command method. So now we'll test this with another button just to show you how it'll look with multiple buttons. So here we're going to create button, let's just call it button 2, and then we're going to instantiate our new button and then add an action listener, and then we're going to make it listen to this class's action listener. Then we're just going to add it to our JButton app. First, let's see how this looks. Oh, wait a minute. It's only showing button 2. Well, that's not what we want. So let's close this for now. Go back to our JButton app. So the reason why button 1 wasn't showing up is because JFrame, our window, by default follows a border layout manager. And you don't have to know this in full detail right now, but the layout manager is used to help dictate where our components should be. And by default, if we just call on the add method, it will place the components in the center, which explains why button 2 replaces button 1. So to dictate where we want our buttons to be, we need to pass in another parameter in the add method called border layout west. And then for button 2, we'll say border layout east. So let's run this app again. And yeah, so now both of our buttons appear on our window. And button 1 seems to be working, but button 2 isn't. And that's because we haven't added a logic for it in the action performed method. So here we're going to add in the logic for when button 2 gets pressed. And now let's take a look. So now if we click on button 2, so we get something printed on the terminal. And button 1 still works. So yeah, this was just an example to show you guys how we can determine which of the buttons have been clicked. And yeah, so for now, I'm just gonna revert everything back to normal because we just want to deal with just one button. So just like JLabel, we can also change the text of our button with the setText method and passing in a new string. Here I'm just changing the text to easy. But note, since we've changed the text of our button, let's see how it'll perform or how it'll affect the action command. So if let's say if we click on our button now, alright, so now we only see the get source method working, but not the get action command method. And this is because when we change the text to easy, the action command of our button also changed to easy as well. So just like JLabel, we can add an image onto it. And I'll have all the images I'll be using for this project in the links below. And what you're going to do is just basically create these resources folder where you're going to add all of the images onto there. And to get the reference or the path of the image, if you're using IntelliJ, you can just highlight the image and just right click it and then click on copy path reference and just select the path from content root. And this is the path that you want to use when we're going to be adding it or passing it into the parameter of our image icon object. So yeah, we can add an image and then we use the setIcon method where we pass in the image icon onto it. So now let's take a look at it. And yeah, so now we have our image here and our text has been moved to the right side of the display area. So let's close this for now. So another thing we can do is change the image when the button's been pressed. And here I'll be adding a new image icon. And then we're going to be calling the setPressedIcon method where we pass this new icon onto it. And this new icon is an explosion image that is also linked in the description below. So now let's see how this looks. So let's launch our program. And right now everything looks normal, but let's click on this button here. And yeah, so as you can see, I'm still holding onto the mouse, so I haven't let go. If I let go, it goes back to the red button. But if I click onto it, the icon has changed to this explosion image. And yeah, so I think that's pretty neat. So let's just close this for now. Let's go back to our JButton app. And so the next thing that we can also do is we could change the image when we're hovering over our button. And we do that with the setRolloverIcon method where we pass in another image icon. In this case, it's an earth picture, which again is linked in the description. And let's see how this looks. So we have our normal button, but once we hover our mouse over it, the image changes to the earth. And then if we click, boom. All right, so let's close this for now. Go back to our JButton app, close this. So just like the JLabel, we can also align the text within the display area of our JButton. And to do that, we just call on the setHorizontalTextPosition method and a setVerticalTextPosition method. So for the horizontal text position method, we could only align the text on the center, the left, or the right. For the vertical text position, we can only align it at the top, center, or at the bottom. So here is just an example, and we're gonna combine them so that the text is aligned in the center horizontally and then at the top vertically. So let's run our app. And yeah, so as you can see here, the easy text has been placed at the top and centered horizontally and at the top vertically. And one thing I forgot to mention in the JLabel video is that when we align the text, we are aligning it relative to the display area. And what the display area is that little, do you see this little square that's within this button? That's the display area where it contains the text and the image. So when we align the text, it's relative to this square right here. So for another example, I want this text to be in the center of this red button here. So let's close this for now. Let's go back to our JButton app, and then we're just gonna comment this line of code, because by default the vertical text position is already centered, so we don't need to call it out, and we just need to center it horizontally. So let's run the app again. And yeah, so you can see the easy text like directly in the center of the button, and it's again relative to the display area or the text and image. I just wanted to point that out because I forgot to mention it in the JLabel video. Anyways, that's pretty much it. So let's just move on and let's close this. Let's go back to JButton app. So there'll be a lot of similarities with JLabel, as these methods are available to a lot of the Swing components available within the Swing library. And here we're just going to change the color to white. So let's run this app. And yeah, so now the text is colored white, and now we can just go back again. So I couldn't show this with the JLabel video, but we could also change the background color. And here we're just going to use the same, or we're going to use the color library and just color the button black. So let's see that again. And yeah, so the button is black, as you can see. But what happens if we pass in null? So if we pass in null, it just reverses any color that you applied to it back to its original button. So since we changed the color to null after changing it to black, just thought I showed you guys. Alright, so we were able to align the text within the little display area of our button. But let's say we want to align the display area within that button, and we can. So I made a mistake again with the JLabel video, where I mentioned that we were aligning the JLabel, or I was making it sound like we were aligning the JLabel within the JFrame, but that wasn't the case. So remember when I told you how by default, if we add a component to the JFrame, since it has a layout manager of border layout, it automatically defaults it to the center. And since there's no other components there, it just fills up the whole JFrame window. So that's why our button takes up the whole screen. So when we're calling the alignment methods, don't get confused with the text position alignment. When we call on the alignment methods, we're actually aligning the display area relative to the button. So there are two methods we call set horizontal alignment when we want to align the display area in the x-axis. In this case, we could only align it to the left, center, or right. And then for the vertical alignment, we can only align it at the top, center, and bottom. So in this case, I've chosen to align the display area to the left side of the button, and then vertically align the display area to the bottom. So it should be in the lower left corner of the button. So let's run this app again. So yeah, so it's kind of hard to see, but let's try to expand the window. And yeah, as you can see here, the display area, which again is that little square you see, and it's aligned always to the bottom left of our button. And remember I mentioned that the button takes up the whole screen. If I click here, this is where the button's at. So this whole button takes over the whole window, and that's just because of the border layout and how it works. And yeah, so just thought I'd clarify that a little bit more. So another thing we could do with button is that we could add margin to our button. To add our margin, we call in the set margin method and create an insets object, and we pass that as the parameter. Here, insets takes in 4 parameters: top, left, bottom, and right. And whatever values you put here will add spacing between the display area and the button. So in this case, we're giving it 10 pixels from the top, 10 pixels from the left, 20 pixels from the bottom, and 10 pixels to the right. So in our case, it won't matter too much of the top and right values because we're always going to be at the bottom left corner. But let's see how it looks now. So yeah, so it's a small difference. You know what, let's make it a little bit more extreme just to show you guys what I mean. So again, the top and right values won't matter because we're in the bottom left. So let's make this like 50, and let's make this 100, or yeah. All right, now let's run the app again. So you can already see a difference here. So let's try expanding it. And yeah, so the left side, there's more spacing on the left side now, and then there's definitely a huge amount of spacing at the bottom. And yeah, so let's close it again. So another thing we could do is we could set or get the keyboard alternative to clicking the button. So what this means is that we could press in a key combination to activate the button through our keyboard. And we can do that with the set mnemonic method, and then we pass in a key event and a key that we want to use to activate our button. In this case, we're going to be using the key E. And to activate our button, we have to press Alt plus the key that we're using, which is E. So let's run this app again. So right now on my keyboard, I'm going to press Alt E. And as you saw, the button activated. So I thought that was pretty cool. Just in case you want to interact with your GUI on your keyboard, I think this is pretty neat. So let's close this for now. So remember the action command I was talking about earlier? Well, let's say you don't want the label to be the action command, or you don't want the label of the button to be the action command of the button. There's a method that you could use to set the title of the action command, and to do that you call on the set action command method and then pass it the string that you want the action command to be. Let's say in your code you want to perform a click, and we can do that with the doClick method. So when this method gets called, it will programmatically perform a click. So with the doClick, we're programmatically performing a click without the user clicking on it. So when we run the app without clicking on the button, we should look at our terminal and it says that we pressed the button, even though I haven't touched the button yet. And another thing we can do with the doClick method is that we can pass in an integer or the millisecond value of how long it should wait before performing the doClick method. So in this case, we pass in 1000, and 1000 milliseconds is 1 second. So what should happen here is when we run the program is first, of course, it's going to perform the doClick since we already called it. But for the second doClick, it's going to wait 1 second and then perform the doClick. So yeah, so we had one, and then as you notice, the second one appearing, the second one being a little bit delayed after the first one, and that's because we wait 1 second before performing the doClick method. And another feature with JButton is that let's say you don't want the user to be pressing the button, or you don't want them to spam the button so many times. So there's a method that you could use to delay clicking of the button. And to do that, we call on the set multi-click threshold. And then we have to pass in a millisecond value. And in this case, 5000 milliseconds will be 5 seconds. So what this means is that it will set the amount of time in milliseconds required between the mouse press events for the buttons to generate the corresponding action events. So in this case, let's run the program. And it's going to perform the doClicks that we've added into the code, but we're just going to ignore that for now. So when we click on our button, it's going to work normally. But when I try to click on the button again, as you can hear with my clicks, it won't work. And it's because we added the threshold with the method that we just called, and we have to wait 5 seconds before we can interact with our button again. So it should be 5 seconds already. So let's try clicking on it again. And yeah, so now it works. So there is a little bit of a bypass that you could do. So this doesn't count the mnemonic that we've assigned to the button. So remember when we signed the key event of E, so when we press Alt E, we can still press it. And in this case, we could still spam it even though we can't click on it after 5 seconds. So that's just a little something that you might want to consider when using this method. And let's say you want to get rid of this little display area border because it doesn't look that good in my opinion. And the reason why it has this is because right now the button's being focused. So let's go back to our app again. So we're going to call on the set focus painted method, and we're going to pass in false. So this is going to remove that little border around our display area or the text and image when we run it. And yeah. So actually I don't like how it looks right now. I think it's because of these alignments, and actually no, it's because of the margin. And I'm going to actually just let it centered in the alignment. So by default, I believe the display area is centered. Let me see. So if we run the app, yeah, so it's it's centered by default. And yeah, so I think this looks better. All right, for this last part, let's change the font because it's kind of too small to read. And again, this changing the font, you can do this with any of the swing. So we're going to call in the set font method, and we're going to pass in a font object where it takes in 3 parameters: the font face, the font style, and the font size. So let's run this app again. And there you go. So that looks way better. So I want to show you guys another cool thing that you can do with the action performed method, or a different scenario. Let's say you don't want to just like output a string to the terminal, because you know that's boring, right? Because you're just like outputting text to the terminal. We can actually show a message dialog to the screen when we click this button. And we do that by calling on the JOptionPane class and then using the show message dialog method, where we pass in this component. And for the second parameter, we're going to pass in the text that we want to output. And I'm going to comment these out for now because I don't want to spoil anything until I click on that button. So let's go back to the main and let's run this app. So now we have our button, everything works fine. We hover over it, a different image appears. When we click on it, boom, a message dialog appears on our window. And that should be the gist of using JButton. Let me know down in the comments if I missed anything. And if you have any other cool tips and other ways of using JButton, feel free to leave it down in the comments. So now it's quiz time. Question: which of these methods is used to set a keybind to the button? You'll have 15 seconds to answer the question. Alright, time's up. The answer is A. We call on the set mnemonic method, and then we pass in a key event and the key that we want to use. In this case, it's going to be E. Leave a like and subscribe if you found this tutorial helpful or you just enjoyed the video. Next up, we'll be going over layout managers. So I'll see you guys then.